Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Friday afternoon Sex and Healing Relationship Interactive Prodependence webinar. Interactive means you get to ask questions. So regardless of the topic I'm presenting today, please feel free to ask any question. I am Debbie McRae. I'm a licensed professional counselor and I work in Mesa, Arizona. My specialty is working with betrayed partners in individual sessions as well as in healing groups to help them recover from their betrayal traumas. And I do focus with that recovery using the Prodependence lens. So today we're going to talk about, as always, something that shows up in my office or in group. And lately it's been the fear cycle. Now we're going to talk about the fear cycle, how to know you're in it, how to stop the fear and stepping out of the fear cycle using some tools that I have found to be very, very effective. So here's what I find showing up. First of all, I will have a betrayed partner come in telling me that the addict partner isn't sharing what they're doing as far as their recovery work, and they're very resistant in creating safety. If that's the case, I see the betrayed partner having so much fear. And they come in, and oftentimes in session or group, that's all they want to talk about because they are in such a state of fear. Another thing that I will see oftentimes is a betrayed partner reporting that they've reached out, they've called their addict partner during the day, they're not answering the phone, they send a text, they're not getting a response, and immediately they're in the fear cycle. Another example is the betrayed partner goes to the addict partner and asks for them to sit down and share what they can do to help create safety for them. And the addict partner becomes very defensive. And as a result of their defensiveness, the betrayed partner is experiencing so much fear. Oftentimes, this is followed with the addict partner saying to them, hey, you're doing too much safety seeking. You need to stop that. And you need to get on your own side of the road and do your own recovery. Again, that increases even more fear in that situation. What I also see too is a lot of the betrayed partners, they go into what I call the stories I'm telling myself. So they will take bits and pieces of information that they see. Maybe they're seeing their addict partner do certain things and they don't have all of the facts. So their brain helps them by filling in the facts. And they create these facts based on their past experiences and even their judgments. And so they'll come in with these really big stories, and those stories create so much fear. So I want you to understand that not all fear is bad. Fear is there to make us aware of danger. That's how our brain is wired. That's how our brain operates. And while the addict partner most times doesn't present a physical threat to the betrayed partner, they do present rather an emotional threat, a spiritual threat to the safety of the betrayed partner. So that's why fear comes in. And the fear is directly associated with the attachment injuries. So remember, the attachment injury is that disconnection, that disruption in our attachment, our emotional, sexual, physical, mental attachment as a couple. And the reason it's so difficult for the betrayed partners is because that's the relationship that you are most vulnerable in. And so when there's that disruption and that break in the detachment because of the addict partners acting out, there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of terror that is a result of feeling so unsafe. Now, I have found that the amount of fear the betrayed partner has is directly associated with and correlated with the addict partner's recovery efforts. It's just a fact. So I find that those betrayed partners who have less fear is because they see their addict partners really engaging in and doing their recovery work. This helps them overcome their fear much quicker. I do find that there are sometimes betrayed partners have to choose to leave the relationship. And when they step out of the relationship, their fear decreases because they're no longer around the threat that is creating the fear. However, I do see increased fear in the betrayed partners where they're trying to live with an addict partner who is either continuing to act out, or they have behaviors where they're minimizing, rationalizing, blaming the betrayed partner. In this case, The betrayed partner has a very difficult time healing because they're continually having this come up again and again and again. So they're constantly going into a fear cycle. So fear is often the result of the trauma that the betrayed partner is experiencing. Fear is a trauma response that in and of itself has certain characteristics. So when I go into fear, I may go into that relational trauma, and that relational trauma will feel like PTSD symptoms. So it's everything from that hypervigilance where you easily startle, you're constantly on alert. It could be that you're having flashbacks. It could be you go back to a conversation you had. You might even have a memory in your mind where this picture keeps coming up and flashing back in your mind. It could be that you have to kind of avoid stimuli because you're so overwhelmed, so you kind of pull away. You become housebound. There's a lot of anxiety, so much anxiety that you can't concentrate. I do find a lot of betrayed partners will say that they're very forgetful, and they're having a hard time retaining or processing information. Of course, there's going to be profound distrust in the addict partner, so they don't know who to turn to and who to trust in that moment because the person they've gone to in the past is no longer safe. There can be nightmares and panic attacks. There can be difficulty staying present. So it's kind of like I'm dissociating. I tell my clients, it kind of looks like I can't keep track of a conversation. I'm kind of feel like I'm wandering off in my thinking. I'm having a hard time staying in the present moment. And of course, there's financial fears that come up, and there's the fear of the relationship ending. That's a really big fear. So as a result, this fear, especially when you combine it with moments of panic or even long periods of panic, it's going to throw you into a cycle that includes two things. This is how you know you're in your fear cycle and you're stuck and you can't get out. The first thing is there's an obsession that takes place. So this is all around your thoughts. So like I mentioned previously, when we see something that triggers us, when we experience that trigger, whether it's something, internally that we think about or something we see, what happens is our mind starts racing. So we go into our thoughts. Our thoughts, like I've said, are the stories we create about the data that we just heard or we just saw or we just thought about. And we get into our stories and we get into this internal dialogue. And lots of times that dialogue begins with the questions of, gosh, is this ever going to get better? Is he really doing recovery? Is this marriage going to work? Is this relationship going to end? What can I do to make it better? What can I do to make him see that he needs to do recovery in a more effective way? And we get into that story, and pretty soon our stories, like I said, are those bits and pieces of information and data that we have, and we fill in the gaps with our interpretation of the data. So I can't tell you how many times I have betrayed partners coming in and their stories are so big. In fact, this last week or two, I've been challenging people on their stories. And one of the ways I challenge them is by saying, so is that exactly what you heard him say? Or have you checked in with your addict partner on that? Is that the truth? And oftentimes they'll stop and they'll realize, well, no, but it's what's happening. And so oftentimes we have to work on, okay, you're in these thoughts, they're keeping you stuck, but are they completely true? Because once we get stuck in those thoughts, it's going to lead us into something called control or control behaviors. So all of a sudden, the betrayed partner recognizes that he or she has to do something right now to control the situation. So if they can't get control of the addict partner, what they're going to do is they're going to start to get control of other aspects of their life, whether it is their physical environment or their children or themselves. We go into these behaviors that are very controlling, much more rigid. I'm trying to create safety. I'm forcing a situation that will somehow in my mind help me feel safe. Oftentimes this is kind of paired with what we call safety-seeking behaviors. And that's understandable. When I'm in fear, I am going to be seeking out safety. And there's nothing wrong in seeking out safety. It's that we want to make sure we do it in the healthiest way possible so it doesn't add to the distress you're already experiencing. So it's important that when I'm in a control cycle, and we'll talk about it in a minute, what I can do to seek safety in healthier ways. So let me give you an example of how the cycle works. So I get triggered by something. I go into my fear-induced trauma. I start to feel it in my body because remember, I'm going to have that fear, and we all feel fear differently physiologically in our body. With that, I go right into my stories. And in that story, I start to figure out and problem solve, what can I do right now to make things better? Sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's unconscious. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes we're not even aware we're doing it until all of a sudden we're realizing that what we're doing isn't working. And oftentimes we'll go back in a therapy session or in group and analyze the effectiveness of what you're trying to do to create safety. Then what's going to happen is you're going to step into, after you've had these stories, you're going to step into some different types of behaviors. So let's talk about some control behaviors that you might find yourself doing. So when I'm now in my fear, I've moved into my obsession, which are my thoughts. I'm now moving into the control behaviors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start focusing on possibly staying stuck in my story. That's one of the things we do. I'm going to try to control the narrative. So as long as I stay in my story, I can figure out, right, how to keep myself the safest. Oftentimes I see betrayed partners, they won't give up their stories because they think they need their stories to stay safe. But unfortunately, their stories lead them to a place of hopelessness, oftentimes depression, and even shutdown. So if you're stuck in your stories, like nothing's going to get better, why should I try? My betrayed partner isn't trying. And I've worked with several clients recently that's how they feel. Well, why should I figure out what I need to be doing for my healing when they're not even doing their healing? That's an example of being stuck in a story. If he loved me, he would be working harder and trying harder in his recovery. Our relationship may never be what I want it to be. I don't think it ever will be. How could it ever get better? His addiction is more important than me. And maybe I'll never be able to trust my addict partner. So a lot of nevers and always and those types of things will help you recognize when you're really stuck in your story. Another type of control behavior I see is when there's an external focus on the addict partner and what the addict partner needs to be doing. I've already made reference to that previously. So you'll see the betrayed partner cracking the whip and trying to tell the addict partner how they need to do their therapy. I've had clients come into session where they've even outlined what they need their partners to do, and it's really just an outline of the recovery efforts that they want their addict partner to do. You can go into doing simple things, watching the history on your partner's computer, checking the internet browser history on their phone, scheduling the addict partner's therapy appointments, watching to see if he goes to group. I mean, just at this, in your mind, you're constantly aware of every move your addict partner's making in regards to their recovery. And oftentimes what happens is the betrayed partner feels like they need to be that moving force that gets the addict partner to recovery. So I've talked in the past about extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. And extrinsic motivation is that I've got other people trying to really motivate me into doing what I know I need to do. Intrinsic motivation is that motivation is coming internally from me. And we know that lasting change comes from those efforts that are really begun with that intrinsic motivation. So that's another thing we see is those control behaviors include, I'm going to try to somehow manage, control, force, push my addict partner into recovery. Another control behavior I see are really intense emotions. And by that, I'm talking about anger and even in extreme cases, rage. So when a betrayed partner gets stuck in these type of emotions, they actually go into their own acting out behaviors. So it's really interesting to view it through those lenses. Now, they go and they act out, and pretty soon that's followed by a lot of shame. And oftentimes they will then go into some of their own personal unhealthy control behaviors. So the betrayed partner themselves can go into their own control behaviors. And that could be everything from unhealthy eating, maybe stop eating, eating too much. It can go into excessive cleaning. So I'm going to really try to control my environment. It could be, I've got one client that talks about that when they go into rage, they clean and their house has never been as clean as it has since they've experienced betrayal trauma. That's an example of a control behavior. The betrayed partner will go into their policing behaviors like we talked about. It could be excessive exercise, being on social media excessively, zoning out and numbing out by watching things, through streaming services. It could be excessive church community service. It could be stepping into your own use of drug and alcohol to help manage the fear. So we have to be very aware of what are my own control behaviors that I do myself that affect me in an unhealthy way. So how do we control and manage and heal the fear? I'm going to go through about 4 areas now and give you some general ideas. We're going to circle back around and talk about one of those areas the next time we meet when we talk about boundaries in a moment. But the first thing that you need to do as a betrayed partner is to be very mindful of when you're going into your fear. Like I mentioned earlier, what does fear feel like in your body? Really check in and just think for a moment. When I'm in fear, what does it feel like? Well, for me, I have a lot of anxiety in my chest and I get a pit in my stomach. And all of a sudden, I do have those racing thoughts. So I'm aware of that physiological response that takes place in my body. Then when I feel that in my body, I check in with myself and go, okay, what are my stories I'm in right now? What have I just been telling myself? And then the next step in that is you've got to change your thoughts immediately. So there's a few ways to do that. First of all, you've got to figure out how to reframe it. So when you're grounded, that means you're connected to that front part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, where there's logic and reasoning and emotional regulation. You're not limbic, so you're not emotional. So you're in that state where you can think more clearly and logically. You're going to come up with a statement, a reframing statement. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One of them is to focus on what you do have control over. So that statement reminds you of what you have control over that will help reduce the fear. So in this moment right now, I have control over the choice to be happy. And in this moment, I choose to be happy. And I choose to believe that whatever comes my way, I have the skills, the tools, the ability, and the support to be able to handle any hard thing that comes my way. So just simple statements like that, a self-compassion statement even, because oftentimes we beat ourselves up when we get back into that fear and control cycle. And so having your own self-esteem, your own self-compassion statement, like mine is always, I'm doing the best I know how to do based on what I know now. I'm trying to do it better, and I'm willing to do it even better in the future, and that makes me good enough. That can pull me out of my stories pretty quickly. Another thing to do is to focus on what you're grateful for. Because oftentimes when I'm in fear, I'm thinking about all the bad things in my life, all the bad things that are happening. So if you're choosing to focus on the things your addict partner is not doing in recovery, you can kind of shift it by focusing on what they are doing and expressing gratitude for that. It'll really create a shift in what you're telling yourself. The other thing to do is there needs to be 15 to 20 minutes daily of mindfulness practice that assists you in surrendering your fear and the need to control. So whatever that looks like, it could be for some people, they might do it by connecting with God, by connecting with their higher power. Some people will listen to meditations that talk about surrendering. Sometimes we can even just journal what we choose to surrender for that day and make that a focus for the day. Those are all some of the mindfulness practices that we can do. The other thing that needs to happen is that part of that mindfulness is that you have to get to a place of acceptance where you understand that part of betrayal trauma is that there is going to be fear, but it's going to lessen as you do your recovery work. It's part of that recovery journey that if you're doing the things you need to be doing, then you're going to notice the fear lessening and lessening and lessening over time. Okay, next area of focus, you have to do self-care. This is very, very critical. I feel like this is something I say all the time. Every time somebody comes into my office or in group and they're struggling, I always check in on how they're doing with their self-care and their routines and their rituals and their own healing practices and their own recovery work. So you have to intentionally choose to focus on you. You have to make you a priority. I oftentimes have to ask the betrayed partner who they're putting first in the recovery work, themselves or the addict partner. And I really encourage them to start focusing on themselves. That's oftentimes very difficult. And so it's important that you do get into those routines and those rituals. Start small if you feel overwhelmed, do one or two things, do them very well for a few days, a week, and then just start adding simple things. Don't make it hard. Oftentimes we think that we've got to do a lot of really big, hard things to be in recovery, but sometimes recovery is just going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, not staying up till 1 a.m. Sometimes it's eating breakfast first thing in the morning or within an hour of waking up so that you're fueling your body. It can be very simple. Sitting out in the sun for 10 minutes a day can be very grounding. Writing in your journal 3 good things at the end of the day that you're really grateful for takes 5 minutes. So there's a lot of simple things we can do to create and to incorporate in our routines and our rituals. Another thing is you've got to put a support system in place of healthy people. Because when you're in your fear, you want to be able to turn to them to help process your fear. So it could be your support group, it could be your therapist, it could be your Weiss friend. I know when I was going through betrayal trauma, I had somebody who had gone through their own betrayal trauma and they were on the other side of healing. So in those really difficult days when I was in so much fear, I would reach out to that person for hope and for them to tell me that life would get better. I needed to hear it from somebody that had that experience. And then you need to create a safe environment for yourself. And that safe environment as part of self-care is going to be boundaries. So the next section we're going to talk about is you either have to establish boundaries or reestablish boundaries that will help keep you out of the fear cycle. So the interesting thing about fear is oftentimes it does motivate us into actually setting some boundaries that we don't have in place, or maybe redoing the boundaries that aren't working. Remember, these types of boundaries are considered to be very protective. They create safety. They are not about control. It's not about punishment. While it may feel like control to the addict partner, remember your viewpoint as the betrayed partner is going to be, I'm doing this because I need safety. And so it always has to be from that framework. That's the motivation behind the boundaries that you're going to put into place to create that safety. So the boundaries create space so that the betrayed partner doesn't have to live in this state of panic and fear all the time. So what we do is we want to set an internal boundary. Here's an example of the betrayed partner. Instead of going into the what ifs and being future oriented and thinking about the worst case scenarios, which are going to lead you to feel powerless, you set a boundary with yourself that says this: well, if my addict partner does this, then I will do this to create safety. So it's this idea of, if you do this, then I will do this, which is the safety boundary. It's a much better place to be because it helps us feel like we have safety, which gives us that sense of feeling grounded and safe and in control, so to speak. So boundaries are going to be very important. That's why we're going to go deeper on that the next time we get together, because there's so much I can say on that. We're going to talk about what prevents us from setting a boundary. If we do set a boundary, what prevents us from maintaining that boundary. So we'll give some ideas around that next time. Now, if you're struggling with some of the internal boundaries you set regarding staying out of your fear, then set a boundary that you're going to take that fear, your obsessions, your thoughts, your control issues to your group or to your therapist for help. Let them help you come up with the boundaries if you don't know where to start. So don't try to do it on your own. That's very, very important. And then lastly, make sure you've got an accountability partner. I love this with boundaries. If I'm going to go set a hard boundary, then I need to go let somebody know about it. Then that way they're going to either check up with me, or I'm going to agree to let them know what's gone on, or when I've set the boundary, or when I'm struggling to maintain and hold to that consequence. They're the person that's going to remind me all the reasons why I need to, so that I can feel safer because I've maintained that boundary. Okay. The last area of focus is that you've got to focus on moving from a state of resistance into a state of acceptance. This is so hard. Easily said, but it takes a lot of work. So you start with this. You start by making a list of the things you can control right now in your life and the things you can't control in your life. And when fear comes up, you go to the list of the things you can control. Along the way, as you're doing your healing work, you're going to learn about surrendering. You're going to learn to put together practices that help you surrender things. And so much of it, like I've said earlier, is stepping out of the stories you're telling yourself and surrendering the outcome, which is so hard. Like I said earlier, I find that the women who do best in their healing work and their recovery are those who finally get to the point where they can surrender the outcome. They don't resist what could happen or may happen or might happen, right? Instead, they just know that whatever happens, that they have the skills and the tools and the ability and the support to be able to handle whatever comes their way. And that is true healing. So that's the place we want to get to. It takes a lot of practice. It takes talking about it, processing it, having a support team. It even takes sometimes journaling the things that are hard, getting it out of your body. We also have our group members do some letting go practices. I had a group of members recently that wrote everything they were going to let go of on rocks, and they took a hike and they all threw them off the top of a mountain together. And they took pictures of it and they came back to group and showed their letting go exercise. It could be writing everything you're letting go on slips of paper and burning it. It could be, whatever, taking one thing a week that you're going to work on letting go of and just doing it just very simple. It might be letting go of going into your stories and using your thought stopping, every time you go into your stories. That it just takes practice, and it takes routine practice of letting it go. So some final thoughts. And first of all, I want you to know that, we have to choose to work through our fear. It has to be a conscious choice at some point. And we have to then at that point choose to step into courage. When I step into courage, that means that I'm really going to push myself out of my comfort zone. I'm going to push myself into being vulnerable. It means that I do run the risk of getting hurt. However, in that process, my courage tells me that regardless of what happens, that I can have the confidence to know that I'm going to be okay, that the end results are going to be one that I can live with, that I can be able to manage and handle. And I will not only survive, but at some point I will recognize that I've also had some abilities to thrive in that process. This last week, I met with a client and I loved what she said. She kind of told me this little mantra that she uses. And I think it's so applicable to this idea of stepping into our courage and letting go of our fear. And she shared with me that when she goes into a place of fear, she reminds herself of three things. She tells herself to let go of what was, accept what is, and then to have faith in what will be. And that's what she reminds herself. And that's what really helps her step out of that fear, that need to control, and it gets her out of all of her stories, the obsessions that keep her in that cycle. So like I mentioned earlier, next time we meet, we're going to talk about those boundaries and how you can put some boundaries in place to create safety so you can reduce your fear. We'll talk about the resistance that comes up in maintaining your boundaries. And if you've got any concerns, if anybody who's listening has any specific areas that they need safety created and they need to put boundaries in place, feel free to reach out to me and let me know, and I'll be happy to incorporate that as some of the things we talk about next time.
So I want to get the quote right. Let go of what was, accept what is,
Have
and
faith.
and have faith.
Have faith in what will be.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to get that right because I'm like that was really good. And what great insight. I had a thought when you had the betrayed partners throwing rocks over the mountains, you know, the visual of like, oh, I let go of that rock, you know, I can't run down the hill and get it back, you know. And so what a great visual to go, no, I have thrown that, it's in dangerous territory, I don't want it back, you know, again. So but I think having that, you know, doing that exercise, because you know it is really easy. And it's interesting, so my meditation this morning was on fear, false evidence appearing real. I was like, okay, I mean, like I'm going to take more time with it. I'm not feeling fearful, but I'm like, when this topic is coming up multiple times, you kind of wonder. So um so much I'm looking forward to the boundaries one, because you know I know that it's a struggle, because the boundaries typically sound like they're coming from, well, if I put these boundaries in place, then he will, you know, do these things, then I'm going to make him get into recovery. The other thing that I think is so clear when you're talking is how much energy is being spent by partners on something that is completely out of their control. You know, their addicts behaviors are, they didn't cause it, they can't stop it, they, you know, they didn't, there's nothing that they can do or not do that's going to change it. You know, I know for me, you know, you talked about the mindfulness. For me, the serenity prayer, which reminds me I can only control my actions and reactions. And that sucks sometimes, because I really, like, I have a plan and we could control everything. But you know, that's what got me into the place I'm in the first place. So that doesn't really work for me. So just being mindful of, like, I can choose to react, or I can choose to calm myself down with a variety of techniques, and then I can take action that isn't going to be harmful for myself or others. It's really hard. Um, the anger and rage, you know, like, I know for sure that is such a powerful, you know, because it's pushed outward, you know, and so then I don't have to feel the hurt and sadness and all of the negatives. I can, you know, I can push it out. So that does become, you know, something unto itself. I think, you know, I think it's so clear that if we want to move forward in a healthy way for ourselves, hopefully with our partner, hopefully our partner joins on the thing. But if we want to do that, we have to, you know, self-care, all of those things that are, you know, critically important for us. And when you think your relationship is going along hummingly, these are things that you don't necessarily pay attention to or do. But when there's, you know, I would say a speed bump, but it might be, you know, you hit a brick wall with things, you know, then you know, it's how can we navigate this in this crisis and move forward differently. So I love this stuff. I'll look forward to the next one. We've got a bunch of questions, so we'll get to those. So the first one is, I am sober over 2 years of porn use and all the lies and deceit that come with those behaviors and choices of mine, and I regularly attend recovery groups. My wife will tell me things on the lines of, you'll do whatever you want, I can't stop you, or I don't care what you do, even though I'm not planning on doing those unhealthy things. She brings up as fear of her. Can you help me understand what is coming up for my wife potentially? How can I respond to her in those instances that shows up for her? That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really awesome question. I wish a lot of the recovering partners asked those two questions, because that is so helpful. Well, I'm going to kind of challenge you to go and ask her, help me understand why you say that. I'm just curious. That's one of the approaches I use a lot with the betrayed partners, is when you go to your addict partner, ask with curiosity, don't get defensive. But obviously that's her safety seeking. She wants to make sure that everything's safe. And my guess is that is how she's trying to explain to you that she's still not feeling completely safe. And so for you, it might be asking her, well, what's coming up for you right now? Is there something you're concerned about specifically right now in this moment? And it might be something very small. It might be something she's thought about for a long time and hasn't brought up. But if you ask her to help you understand what's going on internally for her, one way to do that is to ask her, well, what are the stories you're telling yourself about this? Well, what is your thinking about this? So kind of step into her world and into her thoughts, and that's going to help you kind of understand what you need to do to help support her. And so the response for you would be, well, I hear you say that I'll do whatever I want to do and that you can't stop me. Well, tell me what you're thinking about that. What are you telling yourself along those lines? Okay, then what do you need from me? Help me understand. And so just if you can stay grounded as that recovering partner, and when the betrayed partner brings it up, if you can stay out of your shame and not get triggered and get defensive, that's going to create safety for her as well. And just keep doing it consistently. And every time she comes to you with this fear, just if you can stay grounded, if you can kind of let her talk more about it with those questions that I've shared, then I think you're going to see her fear decreasing, because she can come to you, she can ask those things, even when she says those lines to you, even that I don't care what you do, I do believe she does. That's probably another one of those control behaviors that I talked about a little bit. That's how she can control her fear. By that, I mean, she's not controlling you as much as she's trying to control her fear by telling herself that. But if, like I said, you can stay grounded, you can explore that with her, ask her what she needs, and then provide it for her, you're going to see her safety increase over time.
Yeah, and I think you're right, being curious. I mean, she might be having a bad day at work, like something could be going sideways with that, and it almost has nothing to do with you, but, it's bringing up anxiety with her and she doesn't have the bandwidth. I mean, who knows? So you being curious about what's going on, is a really good place to do. If you aren't doing a check-in, there are multiple ones. I know Debbie has talked about Fine before. There's also Fanos, but having those check-ins where you're communicating, that in a 2-minute little, each of you can, like, it can help you as a couple communicate and stay grounded, as well. So there are a few little things that you could do, but I love, ask her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question. My spouse has been in recovery since 1999 and still finds porn enticing. This scares me. Will he not ever not feel this way?
Okay, well, a couple of questions I would like to go a little bit deeper with you on is, what does that mean by enticing? Is that he has the thoughts about it and he thinks it is, or is he actually acting out on it? Because, I imagine if I were in your shoes as a betrayed partner, even him coming to me and telling me that it's enticing would really take me into my fear cycle. And I would have all sorts of stories going on in my head around that. So I encourage you to go to your spouse who has been in recovery since 1999 and share with him or her the stories that are going on in your head when you hear your partner say that, and share with them the fear and what it's causing you to feel. And maybe you can just start a dialogue. Now, this is going to be a difficult conversation. I'm not going to lie. This might be one that if you guys see a couples therapist, that you might want to take it into session if you need somebody there to help you guys, regulate and kind of stay on track and have a positive outcome. But I think I would want to know a little bit more about, why does he say it's enticing? And as the betrayed partner, I would want to know, well, if you think it's enticing, then this is how it makes me feel, right? And I would go through my talking boundary that I use all the time, which is, when I hear you say that porn is enticing, right? Then I start telling myself, right? Or the stories I'm telling myself right now is that you're not really in recovery. Because if you were in recovery, then you wouldn't even think it was enticing. And because you think porn's enticing, then it makes me feel like you're really not in recovery and I don't feel safe. And then that's the third step, was sharing the emotion, I don't feel safe. And the fourth step is, I need you to, really share with me what you're doing for recovery so that porn doesn't entice you. Or I would like to go into a couples therapist and for us to talk about this more, because I need to create some more safety around this. So, I mean, there's a lot that can go a lot deeper. I can see why that would really, really create a lot of really difficult, scary feelings and emotions for you.
Yeah, taking it out of the porn context. If he was an alcoholic and he kept talking about how great a drink sounded, I would be abundantly concerned about, his sobriety. So, in recovery, we're thinking through, you don't hang on to any of those. Well, you can, but for me, that would be a very dangerous situation. So it's absolutely, I have to think through what would be the negative consequences. I would lose everything. And that is just as fast as any thought about how great it would be. It's all of the wreckage of my life that would follow that. So, but if there's this fantasy place where your spouse is hanging, like, oh, it's so great and it would be so good. And, I don't get to do that anymore or whatever. Or worse, if he actually, is, porn is typically on an inner circle for addicts, that it just is not a safe thing, all of the dopamine and everything else. So, I would be concerned, and I love what Debbie was sharing with the talking boundaries, but also get some professional help. I think it's called for. So. Okay, next question. The trade partner 4.5 years post initial D-Day. I've noticed similarity between coercive control tactics and my safety seeking behaviors and PTSD responses. I'm working towards improving my triggers response. He claims working towards sobriety and recovery, but is moving at a snail's pace, and in my opinion, hasn't fully let go of his addiction. But I have thrown objects and insults and monitor his devices, whereabouts, and finances. I do love him, but I don't want any of this and never did. And finances have stolen my choice to leave. Every abuse on my part and every boundary I set was in direct response to continued behaviors and lying on his part. Is there a difference between trauma responses and coercive control? If so, how do I know if I've crossed the line? How do I hold him accountable to his behavior when I feel so out of control with mine? So lots of questions. The first, let's start with the first one is there a difference between a trauma response and coercive control?
Yes, there is. I'm going to tell you the difference. A trauma response, I have no control over, typically. Now, what I do with that trauma response, I do have control over. So let me just kind of give a little bit of a definition of a trauma response. To me, that is more of a reaction that occurs, in my body or, with my emotions that oftentimes I don't have control over. It just is going to elicit some kind of a reaction in my system because my brain is telling me I am under so much threat. And it's also going to take me back into those same physical sensations and to that limbic part of my brain where I'm going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. So like I said, at that point, when I'm limbic, that's where I have to learn in my recovery to step out of those behaviors that, like you said, could be considered more of that coercive kind of control. And to recognize when I am limbic that I've got to take a pause or a timeout to help my brain get back online, meaning right now I'm limbic, so I'm in fight, flight, freeze, and I've got to calm my system down so I'm back online and I'm connected to prefrontal cortex. So what might happen for you is you have a trauma response, you go right into your coercive control. So that's why I think you might feel like it's a little more paired. I could be right, I could be wrong. I'd probably explore that with you if I was working with you. And then I would also kind of have you identify, okay, what does coercive control look like to you? So we did an exercise this last week in group around safety seeking, and you could do this with coercive control. So what we did is we did a continuum. At one end, we had healthy safety seeking. At the other end, we did unhealthy safety seeking. And we started sharing what they are doing, right? What are some of those coercive control or those unhealthy safety seeking behaviors, that they're doing? And then we put them on that continuum. And then we talked about how could we take the unhealthy and how could we now move it down that continuum and make it healthy? So with your coercive control, I encourage you to write down your list. What are you doing when you go into those moments where you're having a trauma response and it leads you into that coercive control? And then are there any other ways that you can approach it? Is there a boundary you can put into place beforehand, either for yourself or with your partner, that if this comes up and you have a trauma response, you know what you're going to do? That's really easy to say, but I know it's going to take some work. You've had a lot of loss based on what I can see in there. So I imagine you do have a lot of trauma. So it takes time. I hope that you're working with somebody that is helping you understand your safety seeking behaviors, understanding your PTSD responses, and then working with you on being stabilized. Once we get to stabilization and we're working recovery, then we can go deeper and work on some of the trauma. So then you aren't going to go into those trauma responses. That's another thing that you're going to be working on as part of your recovery. Sometimes we do cross the line when we go into coercive control. I know in our program, and I believe in Dr. Rob and Kim Weiss's book on practicing prodependence, there is an abuse inventory in there. I would recommend that you get a hold of that, so get a copy of their book and go through the abuse inventory, because it's really interesting. What we do is we have the betrayed partners go through the inventory and mark in different sections the behaviors they're doing and the behaviors their partner are doing. So in your case, it would be, you're going to look at those behaviors on there and see if those coercive behaviors happen to kind of fall under some of that in that abuse inventory list. And then you can work with your therapist on stepping out of those behaviors. How do you hold them accountable when you feel so out of control at times? I think that's where you're going to need support from other people to help you regulate. You're going to have your own really strong internal boundaries in place that will help you, step into, responding rather than reacting. And that takes work and really good boundaries. And again, going back to what I said earlier, the accountability, somebody in place to hold you to those actions, whether it's a therapist or a group.
Yeah. I was thinking him having his accountability people, and as Debbie is sharing, you having support for your accountability. It is hard to take that pause. This is going to happen. Like this is a pattern. I've talked about it before, the negative two-step. You do this, he does that, you do this, he does that, or somebody starts it. And so somebody taking a pause and saying, I'm going to walk away. I'm just, and even saying, when this happens again, I'm going, we're going to take a 20-minute, but we're going to come, whatever it is that you need to do, but walk away, in that moment, because otherwise this pattern, you could continue this, forever, and it doesn't get you anywhere, so I really think getting to a place where you can, be mindful, do some mindfulness techniques, walk to the other room, call a friend, whatever it is you need to do, journal. Debbie's talked about that a few times. So, get it out. I'm so angry because, that's better than throwing something or hurling insults. You can never take words back, so it just creates more of a gap. And if the goal is to create gaps, like the pattern can continue. If the goal is for healing for yourself and hopefully eventually for the relationship, then, then stopping these destructive patterns, somebody's got to, take the first step towards that.
Yeah. And I want to say though, that 4.5 years since your initial D-Day, that is a long time.
It's a long time.
And the fact that you feel like your partner's moving at a snail's pace, that is hard. So I want to really validate the fact that you're dealing with a difficult situation. For 4.5 years, somebody working at a snail's pace, not feeling like they're in their addiction. I can understand why you're doing safety seeking. I can understand that. That's why I really want to emphasize, if your partner is not doing recovery, you get the support people that you need, and you put the people in place that will help you do your own recovery. That's where you're going to be able to step out of those trauma responses easier, regardless of what your addict partner is doing. It is possible to become regulated as you focus on your recovery with the support of other people.
Yeah, and it has to feel extra challenging because you feel stuck. You feel stuck because of finances, and I don't know your situation, and I don't know what is being done so that things can shift. But yeah, if you are feeling like, I am stuck with this person, I love them, but I also hate them, and things aren't getting better, then a therapeutic in-house separation maybe. Like there are ways to navigate the space. It's challenging, but that could give you a little breathing room as well. So Okay, next one. My husband seems to be in good recovery, but he still judges others, which is very triggering to me. It makes me want to say, how can you judge anyone with what you've done? I try to bite my tongue most of the time, but neither option seems like a good idea. I've talked to him about this and he seems to understand, yet he continues to judge others. Any thoughts on how to handle this? That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. You know, as I read your question, I'm wondering if he still has a lot of shame, because typically I know in the past when I've been in my shame, I'm very judgmental of other people because I'm not feeling so great about myself. And so oftentimes I'm much more critical about other people. I think I would go and use the talking boundary with him, because I'm going to tell you why. You can express just what I said using a talking boundary, and it would sound like this. You know, when I heard you say this, and you're going to use his exact words, that judgment statement he made about somebody else, the story I'm telling myself is, I'm wondering if you're maybe in your shame. And the reason you're judging other people is because, you know, you're not feeling so good about yourself. And I'm also wondering if maybe this is something that you really want to work on changing, or maybe you like doing it. So see, I can share a lot of things because these are truth. These are the stories I go to. So you have to identify, what do you tell yourself in those moments when you hear your partner, your husband, make those critical statements of other people, and then let him know how it makes you feel. When I hear you say that, and then I think those stories, it makes me feel really sad. And sometimes I'm even frustrated, because you're judging other people. It makes it difficult for me. And then remember, the last part of the talking boundary is putting the boundary in place that you need, you know, moving forward. You know, would you be willing to go work with your therapist on maybe your shame, if that's the case, so that you aren't so critical of other people? Or moving forward, when you start to get critical of other people, I'm just going to put my hand up and ask you to stop, and because it's too much for me to hear. And then that way I can stay connected to you, because when you criticize other people, it makes me want to move away. So that's one idea of how to approach it.
I think that's a great one. And wow, you know, like it would invite dialogue, not,
Mhm.
you know, when you do this, you know,
Mhm.
I mean, it's just challenging. So, okay. My wife tells me that I haven't changed. I've been sober from porn for over 2 years and regularly attend meetings. She brings up things that I haven't changed, more on the lines of when I do something that she doesn't like, such as how I parent, or the passivity that I can exert as I try to not try to trigger her. Is she more upset with the items at hand or the unhealthy behaviors of mine through our marriage? She tells me I don't care. I do care, but how should I respond when she says that I don't care?
Okay. So I believe that it's probably time for you guys to do some couples work, because this sounds like it's a sticking point. Based on your question, you're 2 years into recovery, you're regularly attending meetings, and I realize that there's some other things that are kind of coming in that sounds to me like a little bit outside of some of your recovery work. It's just your parenting, it's your passivity. I realize that you're probably trying not to trigger her. And so in some ways, you're probably afraid to show up as well authentically, and maybe as confident as you normally would. So this would be a great place, a great thing to take into this dynamic and this pattern into work with a couples therapist. So you can kind of, with the therapist's help, just kind of track the pattern and have some understanding, and share, you know, your perceptions. Those are the stories with the therapist there, and really getting down into how does that make you feel, really those deeper feelings and emotions, and what is the need there. Obviously there's needs that both of you have that aren't being met by each other. And I do come from an emotionally focused therapy approach, because that's what I'm trained in. So a lot of it is about recreating or reestablishing secure attachment. And so if she's kind of feeling a certain way, and, you know, she's bringing things up in all the ways you haven't changed, because obviously she's in her fear, she's got a lot of thoughts around that. So she's kind of using the control outward with you. If we can figure out what her attachment need is, then you should see that other behavior going away. But you're going to need the help of a therapist. And I believe somebody that can help you see it, understand the pattern you're in, and then help you figure out how to step out of it. This might be a good one to even take to Matt Wheeler's Friday afternoon, 2:30 webinars on the 2nd and 4th. Fridays because he works a lot with couples. And, how do you kind of get out of this dynamic with her, and how can you work with her on finding out what her safety needs are, which are her attachment needs. And hopefully then, she will kind of feel more secure in the relationship, and you'll still see some of these controlled behaviors decrease.
So we've got a couples healing from betrayal work group. It's a 6-week course. I put the link in. We only offer it twice a year. Dr. Susie LeBrock facilitates. It's really solid, and there's good pieces that I think might be useful for the two of you as well. Okay, we have only a few more minutes. We've got a bunch of questions. Literally, my body nervous system is still in danger mode and feels unsafe and won't let me sleep at night. I do acupuncture and I'm now on a low digestion and energy. The abusive, unfaithful left me for dead in 2020 and walked out of my life. Now, since 1.5 years, he's been sending me flowers, no apologies, no recovery work, just bouquets with, I can't quite tell. What am I, his whore he is giving me in order to call him? It's so dominating, disrespectful, and entitled. Yes, in 2018, I fell into this game. So he's counting on that I'll break again. This person almost cost me my life. What best to do or don't do? He is mentally, is he mentally unstable? I ignored all attempts before the last 1.5 years. I'm still suffering and healing from this damage.
Yeah, this would be where I would tell you to focus on you. Definitely. Yes, there's some real concerns there. The behaviors indicate to me somebody that if they do have an addiction, there's probably some other co-occurring, maybe disorders or other situations there that does make this person unsafe. So for you, it's really, really important that you have people around you for support, that you focus on your healing work and your recovery. And that includes even healing from those physical symptoms that you have in your body. So I like what you're doing. I like the acupuncture. My clients who have a lot of trauma in their body, I would recommend that you see a trauma therapist to work through some of that trauma, or, hopefully a Prodependence based, specialist who can help you with the betrayal trauma and do the trauma work with you. You need to do some somatic work that's working with your body to release some of the trauma you're holding on to. I also like body work. So any kind of, if you're comfortable with massage therapy, something like that will also help your body release some of that. Breath work. There's a lot of great groups out there now where you can go to breath work sessions that will help release trauma from the body. Anything like that, really start focusing on restoring your body, releasing the trauma from your body. With that, get the support you need so you don't and won't go back to that abusive partner. I think you need to get real with yourself, make that list of, all the bad things you've experienced versus all the good things. And when you look at the good things, also take into consideration the length of time you've experienced the good things. The length of time you've experienced the bad things. You've got to get very real with your reality. And then you've got to put some pretty strong boundaries in place, which will require that you have some kind of accountability partners in your life too, so that they can help you maintain those boundaries. Right now, as I see your question, if I were your therapist, I would really focus on making sure you're safe and that you're doing well and that you're focusing on you. I would want you to choose you in this recovery right now.
Yeah, restraining order came to mind for me. So the person from before added, my spouse is not looking at porn. It's just not disgusting to him. Although he has had several relapses, he has been sober for 90 days. With reference to my husband, recovery since 1999, he has had several relapses and works with a CSAT, just completed 90 meetings in 90 days, and is working ACA reparenting workbook, but still finds porn enticing. So I have a question, because I'm going like, enticing to disgusting are complete opposite ends of the spectrum, and having it be neutral. I mean, one of my addictions is alcohol. I mean, it's just one of many, but I don't find alcohol disgusting. I find it to be like something that would not be a really good choice to me, and I don't hover over it and think about it or whatever. But I also didn't have to go to the extreme of it's horrible and awful and all of that. So I guess I'm wondering, when you say, he's not doing it, he's working on some sobriety, and he's doing some things, if the goal is sobriety and not acting out, hopefully he's working his program, working the actual steps, to get the proper focus. Anything that has too much of a hold, is problematic. So Debbie, what are your thoughts?
I would
We gotta wrap.
encourage him to go work on that with his CSAT therapist,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you want to see what's at the root of that. There's obviously some thinking and some beliefs that are associated with that hopefully, so encourage him. That's what you can do, and say, please take that to your therapist. Would you be willing to take that to your therapist to talk about that? That's concerning to me when I hear you say this, right? Here's where it takes me into these thoughts and these feelings. And it would be really helpful for me, and I would feel safer for me if you would go discuss,
Yeah.
how you view porn with your therapist, because to me, this doesn't feel safe.
Yeah, if he's fantasizing about this and thinking it's, like you can have one of the problems with porn is you can have the euphoric, you can have those images flashing through your mind. So that would be challenging, and that would be absolutely, for work with therapy and within the 12-step community too. So, okay, we're out of time and I've got another meeting. So I will let everyone go. Thank you so much, Debbie. This is great. I look forward to next time with boundaries. That'll be super helpful. Bye, everybody. Thanks for the
Bye.
questions.